Well, that ranking membership is still speaking to reporters right now. We're monitoring that. But if it is supposed to dissuade buyers and those investors who seem to think that this could be a sort of a side soap opera that delays tax cuts and delays action on health care, remember this big redo in Washington? A funny way it's showing it. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and you're watching Your World. And there is a disconnect between the obsession with what's going on in Washington and what average folks at home want to see. Apparently, 3 out of 4 of you want a fair tax system. And here's the thing. You want it now. Now, here's the other thing. Washington is caught up in serious political squabbles, not only about the role of the Russians in last year's presidential election, but whether there's anything resembling a cover-up now. Of course, there's so much we don't know. This much we do. Wall Street and investors seem to be betting that we will make progress on something that has at least largely bipartisan support, tax cuts. The differences are in the details and who gets them and when. But then there is this side issue here about how we feel, how average Americans feel. And apparently, as I said, according to a Fox poll, and there are others out that echo this, we want tax cuts. We want a simpler tax code. We want action on jobs. And while we are mesmerized by some of these political allegations back and forth, we want something extra in our wallet. The Washington Examiner's White House correspondent, Sarah Westwood, on whether any of that will come to pass. What do you think, Sarah?
While it's difficult to say given the debacle that was the health care negotiations, I think that left both the White House and congressional Republicans feeling a little bruised and a little disheartened about how to proceed forward on some of these consensus items like tax reform. The Fox News polling does show that there's broad public momentum behind tax reforms. Like you said, 73% of voters want to see the tax code changed or marginal rates brought down. At least 55% of people think that they pay too much in taxes every year. The question is whether some of these divisions that were exposed in the healthcare fight can be papered over on some of the finer points of tax reform, because while there's consensus over the broad strokes of what Republicans want in terms of tax reforms, there are still some disagreements about several key issues like the border adjustment tax.
You know, and there's also, Sarah, some doubt about how much the administration's heart is into this right now, and the timeline, the rollout of events, something our Blake Berman of Fox Business Network was raising with Sean Spicer about an hour ago. I want you to react to this.
Is tax reform the #1 priority for this administration at this point, or is health care still kind of taking up some of the oxygen?
Well, I don't know that it's taking up oxygen. I think there's plenty of oxygen for both to go on. I think the president would still like to see it done. But I think there's no reason that we can't. I mean, if you look at the timeline for tax reform, you're talking several months. And so I think that the process is beginning on that, and I think you can have a dual-track strategy.
Can you, Sarah, have a dual-track strategy? I understand the thinking legislatively with resurrecting the health care thing, trying to get it right. The $1 trillion in revenue over 10 years that you get from that to begin hooking up on this. But it seems once poisoned at the well, you don't go back for a drink.
Right. The initial message out of the White House and out of House Speaker Paul Ryan on Friday was that Republicans just needed to walk it off, put some time in between them and the failed vote on Friday, and then come back to health care when conditions had changed, when Obamacare had deteriorated a little bit, and maybe Democrats would be willing to come to the table. That's clearly not necessarily going to be how they approach this. We know that negotiations are still ongoing with the Freedom Caucus, with the Tuesday group about health care reform legislation. And you're right, the calculations in the healthcare legislation could have a dramatic impact on the baseline used to calculate tax reform. And so it's not something that will be easy to do at the same time simultaneously, because you do need the healthcare calculations to move forward with tax reform, or else you're going to have to sort of scrap the whole legislation and start over if you don't have healthcare passed by the time you get to tax reform. So it's a really difficult balancing act if the White House wants to try to do both.
So real quickly, if you'll indulge me, Sarah, is it your sense here that there are more votes, regardless of how they sort out this healthcare thing, more votes, more Republican support on the tax cut front, especially among the Freedom Caucus, than there was on the healthcare thing?
I do. That's my sense, because there isn't as much politically riding on tax reform. It's known that Republicans, broadly speaking, want to lower marginal rates. They want to cut taxes. But there's not any sort of strong promises like there was with Obamacare. We're going to repeal it. It was black and white. This is what we're going to do. And conservatives felt that the bill put forward didn't do what they promised, and that's why they opposed it. With tax reform, there's a lot more wiggle room in what policies are put forward, and Republicans are probably going to be a lot more willing to compromise on something that they didn't stake their campaigns on when they were running.
All right, Sarah, great reporting. Sarah Westwood, Washington Examiner, White House correspondent. I want to get the read from David Smick on this. David is the former chief of staff to the late, great Jack Kemp, of course, the co-author of the great Kemp-Roth, or if it was Senator Roth, the Roth-Kemp tax cuts that inspired, of course, Ronald Reagan, and, of course, set the stage for what was arguably the biggest tax cut in human history. That was then. This is now. David, you say time's a-wasting, right?
I do, and I think it'd be crazy to go back to the poison well a second time. All these, it's there's 52 senators in the Republicans in the Senate. It's very narrow.
I don't get it, David.
Sure
I don't get it.
You know what I'm calling for? I think Donald Trump needs to do the equivalent of an inch-on landing in economic policy. And for your viewers who don't recall that, in 1950, in the conflict between North Korea and the United Nations under General MacArthur, it hit a stalemate. It was kind of like the House of Representatives today in the Republican Party. MacArthur went north in a bold move and it scored amazing victory. I think that Donald Trump needs to go bipartisan in almost a radical way. That's how we did the '86 tax reform. It was bipartisan, but he can't just offer a rhetorical suggestion, oh, we should be bipartisan. Give them a plan that has not only the things that Republicans want, but also some things they want. I'll give you two, for example. One, give them a plan that deals with worker mobility, a voucher system, so that if a poor person in an area that doesn't have a lot of jobs, but they can't afford to move to an area that's looking for employees, that you help them do this. Also, very, very modest, and I know this is controversial, modest, phased in, slight bump up in the minimum wage. So you have to throw something out, target the 25 senators, first of all, who are up for re-election from states that Trump carried, and say, we'll work with you. Here's some things that you're going to like. Now, I will tell you one thing. If you're up for re-election in less than 2 years, you're going to think very, very carefully before you vote against a slight bump up in the minimum wage, particularly given that you're going to like the infrastructure spending and all the other elements of the package that Trump is offering. But you can't just say, like I hear Senator Schumer often says, yes, I'm for a compromise, but it's always, one side not giving up something. In 1986, it's exactly what we did. There was a tax reform bill. It was unwitting. It was unexpected that came out of the Reagan White House that was far more left than anyone thought.
That's because he had to give away a lot of concessions. It ended up not being as friendly to what he originally. But here's what I want to get a sense from you now.
Yep,
I argue time's a wasting. I know people said it took a longer time in '81 for the president to do that. Is Ronald Reagan his first tax cut, and then '86, the more formative, completely take this tax system by the roots and change it. But having said that, if you want to reach across the aisle, this president seems to be betting on infrastructure as a way to get Democratic support. But as far as I understand it, Dave, he's trying to do it by separate packages. Here's infrastructure. You Democrats might like that. I hope you could stick around later on the tax. I don't know if that's such a guarantee.
I think that's a huge mistake. I think they have to put together a package, bipartisan package. The Democrats will like the infrastructure. There will be a corporate tax reduction. You have to do the pass-throughs. And then I would make, frankly, I'd have repatriation part of the package in which
would pay for the infrastructure, the money, the trillions held
which would pay.
Now, he might say that, but the way, if you had to handicap it now, I've been mentioning the markets real quickly, David, they seem to think all this hullabaloo over the Russian thing and who knew what and when, who was talking to what, that they seem to be betting, because we're only 2% from our highs back in the beginning of March, that it's still going to happen. Do you think it's still going to happen?
I think it can happen because I think your former guest said, look, it's popular. The public wants it. I think not only do they want tax relief, tax reform, they want a rip-roaring economy. I mean, that's what it's all about. So I think they'd be smart to start in the Senate. Usually, I'm not convinced that, I don't want to call the Freedom Caucus names and all the rest. I think they have a different agenda. Their agenda is not to govern, and I think you got to face it. They are not interested in governing. Start in the Senate and see if they can put together a bill, and then, but you have to have an actual bill. That's what we had. We had a proposal with details, and it was very tough for Democrats to say, ew, I like that, but it's Reagan. I can't support Reagan. Well, guess what? They did, and it worked.
It can be done.
It can be done.
We'll watch it, David, very closely. Thank you, my friend David Smick, former chief of staff to the late, great Jack Kemp, the great Equalizer author as well. All right, Jack Welch on all of this, arguably one of the greatest CEOs we've ever had in this country's history. Why he says this recovery could be history if we don't get this done. And now, after this. All right, everyone seems to think it's the Democrats who will do their best to torpedo the Trump agenda, including those tax cuts and the health care rework. What if I told you that it could be conservative Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, getting figured by no less than the president, that it will hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast? We must fight them and Dems in 2018. Katie Pavlich with me right now, townhall.com editor, Fox contributor. Boy, we've got is it a tiny civil war, or how would you call it?
I would say it's an interesting, misplaced civil war. So President Trump is blaming the Freedom Caucus for the failure of the health care bill, despite a number of moderate Republicans publicly coming out against the bill.
Do we know the final numbers, Katie, what they were looking like, that it was? I've heard everything. They were 5 to 7 short. Others saying they were like 20 short.
I would say they had about 35 votes against the bill. They could only care to lose 21 in order to get it passed. So I think they were pretty far off. But in terms of the Freedom Caucus, there's some discussion on the Hill today that's interesting because Congressman Labrador, who's part of the Freedom Caucus, responded to President Trump's tweet about them and said, look, remember who your friends are, because on the campaign trail, the Freedom Caucus stood up for President Trump, then candidate Trump, when Paul Ryan disinvited him from that rally. Point. And now we have things, the tables have turned, and the White House seems to be blaming the conservatives on the Hill.
And that's a
for
change, right? Because right afterwards,
right?
I mean, right afterwards, the president was saying, you know, they're all good people, they're friends of mine, they, you know, they vote their conscience, et cetera. But now that we're setting in, he's sending out a clear directive.
Right.
You're either with me or against me, right?
Well, and I had asked Press Secretary Sean Spicer the day before the vote, who are they going to blame if this thing doesn't pass? Because at that time, they didn't have the votes. Which is a very cynical question, I remember that. I asked them, you know, are you going to blame the rhinos and the establishment in the House, or are you going to blame the Freedom Caucus for the failure of being able to get these votes? And they said at the time they weren't interested in the blame game. Clearly that has shifted, but I think it's important to remember how the majorities in the House and the Senate got to this point of being Republican majorities. It was the Tea Party movement, which is now the Freedom Caucus, that got President Trump that majority before he entered the White House.
Yeah, but now they could be coming back at him and hurting his cause. I don't know what the truth is. I just know it probably doesn't help when they sling arrows at each other, and including the president's comments that got Panache and some of these other members to say, you know, stop it already. Well, so I'm wondering if any of this is retrievable now.
Well, and they're moving forward clearly on a new bill. I mean, the House,
I think that's stupid.
Well, it might be, but they're saying we have to keep our promise. We're interested in keeping our promise to the American
people. I know, but why go back to the same thing you botched before, hoping that the second time you'll do a better job?
Well, you know, this was the first big thing that they've done together. I think that we should give them a little bit more credit for not falling into...
But if you had 35 no votes the last time, Katie, how are you all of a sudden going to whittle that down?
I think that they need more time to negotiate as a caucus and governing power. I agree, and I think they should move on to tax reform, absolutely. Right. But I think that Republicans have to be very careful about falling into this trap of government doing something for the sake of doing it, whether it's Republicans in Congress or whether it's Democrats in Congress. They have to take a step back and say we're going to do it together.
No doubt,
and then
but
we'll move forward.
And I know that what we're staring at, if this doesn't get done this year, in election year, what's the prospect of it getting done?
Not great, but I would recommend that Republicans don't campaign on repealing Obamacare in the next election cycle if they can't actually get it done.
I want to get your thought on this. Senate Intelligence Committee now holding hearings on Russia and revelation there you don't know who to believe, that James Comey had wanted to give the Obama administration a heads up on intelligence he had that showed the Russians were having an active role in the election last year, and that he was apparently advised, don't write an editorial as you want to do, just don't do anything.
Right.
Do you believe that?
I do, but it's interesting to look at when the Obama White House started reacting to the Russia problem. It seems as if this argument that Democrats are making, it's all about protecting democracy, that's why we have to look into this Russia issue. If that was really the case and it wasn't about political cynicism, you would think that the White House would be open to the FBI director in the summer of 2016 coming out with an op-ed and saying, just as a warning to all voters on every side of the political aisle, the Russians are trying to influence the presidential campaign with propaganda in certain states, in certain cities, with online sources.
I think they were just running out the clock, though, at the time. They thought it was such a sure bet Hillary Clinton was going to win in a walk.
Right.
Why complicate the story?
Well, they wouldn't complicate it because maybe it was going to benefit Hillary. Maybe they didn't have all the details at the time of who the Russians were going to benefit.
Just enough that they didn't know at the time that this was something that the Russians were actually trying to hurt Hillary.
Right. I have no doubt that if it was going to hurt Donald Trump, that they would be perfectly fine with not saying anything. We don't know that, but I think it's important to go back to this argument of if they're going to say this is all about democracy and protecting the system, then they should have said something last summer and let everybody know this was going on before voters headed to the polls.
All right, real quickly, will we get tax cuts this year?
I'm going to say yes, because I'm hopeful that we will. I'm with the 70% of Americans that believe that we need to be spending less money in Washington. They have a record number of tax dollars going into that city, and yet we don't see the fruits of what that money is doing. So let's see.
I'm going to hold you to that, Katie. And if you're right, I won't replay this, all right? But if you're wrong, I will.
Okay,
all right,
fair
Katie
enough.
Pavlich, townhall.com, editor, Fox News contributor. What does Jack Welch think of all of this? Arguably one of the best CEOs this country has ever had, on what he is making right now of the push to get tax cuts done, the health care rework done, and what his successor is saying at GE about climate change. It turns out that Jeff Immelt is a big believer in it, and is worried that the president is not. After this. All right, we told you about the 7 out of 10 Americans who want tax cuts like yesterday. We also told you separately a few days ago on Fox Business, which if you don't get, you should demand, that it's virtually 9 out of 10 in the investment community. And among the CEO crowd, about 8 out of 10. Suffice to say, with these various and different groups, they want action on something like that matters, will matter to the recovery, will matter to their bottom line, and for average folks, well, more money in their wallet. The former CEO of General Electric, executive chairman of Jack Welch Management Institute. Jack Welch, good to see you, my friend.
Hi, Neil. How are you?
I'm okay. I don't know about these tax cuts, though, about health care rework. What do you make of this?
Well, they did a hell of a lousy job on the health care thing. They didn't communicate it. And
who didn't?
They handed the president a package that was the speaker's dream, and they transformed a glass breaker into a package deal to go follow them along. And he played ball, he did his part, but they didn't do their part, and they didn't deliver.
Would you have done the health care thing up top?
No, I would. Look, he won on jobs. He didn't win on health care.
But now the argument, and again, this gets back in the process here.
Reconciliation, don't give me that in 1, 2, 3.
You would have gone right ahead with tax cuts. But now they're back to trying the health care thing.
Well, they better get the reforms in place. Now, he's done the regulation things.
Right.
He's moved on the ISIS front. So he's moving on a number of fronts. I had, in the last 3 days, I've had 9 CEOs in for our private equity reviews. 5 in consumer, 4 in industrial. Every one of them positive. There's a vibration out there.
Positive about the president?
The economy, and we're...
Oh, okay.
We don't talk much politics.
Oh, I don't believe that at all.
No, we don't. And these reviews, no.
Okay.
But then last night, I went out in New York with 4 of your media types. And
you said that very disdainfully.
No, I just raised the hands.
Okay.
And we had dinner. And the first question to me, because they know how I feel, what's the over and under on Trump in months?
Really?
Yeah. This is your New York friends. Guys, oh, you
I
know.
don't have any friends.
You know him.
Well, a few months that he's a basket case at that point, or what?
He'll quit or something.
Really?
You don't hear this around here? Come on, Neil, shape up. But it's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy because the country, as far as the consumer confidence level, rig count has doubled in the last 3 months. So there's so many positive signs. If he get off this stuff, the temperament stuff, the angry tweets, this morning's Freedom Caucus, crazy.
But what do you do about a Freedom Caucus that is not budging much?
You don't go back and rub their nose in it. You talk to them about the next plan you're coming with, and you get 216 votes.
Because he has told them as well, it's this way or the highway here, and I want everyone on board.
The highway will be him if they don't do it.
I see. Now, meanwhile, the media and the back and forth is on the Russian role in the election. Is that, whatever you think of that subject, do you think it's going to be enough of a distraction to delay any of this?
I think there's an 80+% chance we get tax reform done by the end of the year.
Really?
Yeah.
Even with all of this?
All of this.
Do you know why I wonder about that when I hear they want to revisit health care? And it seems like...
That's a bottomless pit. Look what it did.
So I don't understand the fixation with giving it another go.
No, I'm not into that. I don't know those dynamics. But we had a president who breaks glass, and they put him in a straitjacket and had him play by the rules, reconciliation.
So what does he do? That's how we're in this crazy world. They get
It didn't bother Harry
legislation done.
Reid. It didn't bother Harry Reid when he was there. It seems to bother Republicans more than Democrats.
So use your simple majority, whatever it is, pound whatever you want through.
Well, try to be bipartisan if you can, ideally, but you don't start out being bipartisan by calling Chuck Schumer a clown. You know,
now, he did have Chuck Schumer at the White House the other day,
very
number one
nice.
Democrat, yeah?
And that's more than we ever saw Barack Obama do.
How did you deal with it? When you took over GE, you were like 19 years old, right? So when you took over, you had to deal with a lot of people who weren't keen on this new young guy who came in. So how did you deal with them? Did they take a little ride somewhere, or what did you do?
Well, we had a chat. And,
oh, really?
And they decided...
What was the chat?
See, the deal, the difference is that my job is so much easier than this job where you they console and cajole and bring them along. We just act. The CEO's a lucky guy. If he gets it right.
And that's Trump's experience, right? I mean, the president's experience is coming from that world. It's a big adjustment, right?
Well, his reaction, but he played ball by the rules in healthcare.
He most certainly did.
And he worked hard and he dug into the details. But look, I'm a semi-junkie. And they didn't lay out for the mass population. Here's what you get with currently. Here's what will happen to you, most of you. Here's what happened to some of you. And here's what's going to happen. They let the CCBO totally take control of it. 24 million people lose their health care. Holy Christ, what do I do now? I'm going to lose my health care.
So they stole the agenda, but now he's sort of that bull in the china shop. Like I said, he's a glass breaker. So tell him now what he should do.
He should focus. Keep the regulations going. Think about jobs. Get this country working. The idea is you win with a rising tide, taking all boats to better prosperity. Think of that in this tax reform bill. Make sure the corporate tax is fair globally. Make sure the middle class gets the bulk of the tax cuts going forward.
But what if it's all they can muster is a corporate tax cut?
That's a good start. Take it.
Take anything you can get. You need the W, right? You need
a win, and you need an economy. He's hitting regulation every day.
Wall Street still seems to think we're going to get this. Is Wall Street getting a little ahead of itself?
No, because the feeling out there is that we were on fire. If you look at 10 years, the housing is at its highest. Yeah. Consumer confidence has been as high as...
There's no reporting in the press, you know.
Yeah, but Look at it.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's
The
very
numbers
strong.
are staggering. Europe is on fire now. On fire, it's a tinder. But you see the flame.
Right.
Japan is going. Canada is going.
No, I'd be remiss if I mentioned your successor at GE took the president on climate change, saying that his view is hurting. What do you think?
Well, I retired 17 years ago.
How do you feel on climate change? Who's right, Jeff Immelt or the president?
I don't think it's one way or the other. I think we should have an energy policy like he's proposing, all of the above, and I think we got to keep testing the hypothesis. It's proven to me yet.
So that's kind of a mealy mouth.
Yeah, typical of me.
Yes, okay. Jack Welch, always great. Thank you, my friend, very much. All right. So President Trump, I don't know if you're watching, listening. I don't know if he does, but you just heard some great words of wisdom there. Your call. More after this.
Is this an actual negotiating tactic by the president, though, or do you think this is a constructive way to do it?
I mean, it's constructive in 5th grade.
All right. Not all caucus members are happy with the way the president has branded them and fingered them for not going along and supporting the latest health care measure. They're trying to rework that now. The strongest words, though, come from the president on this, that the Freedom Caucus is going to hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team. And fast to a Virginia Republican congressman, a member of that Freedom Caucus, Tom Garrett. Congressman, good to have you. What did you think of not only the president's singling out the caucus, but Amash's and some of the other colleagues' response?
Our response was that perhaps he's suffering from Stockholm syndrome. What I said to the president, in essence, in the Oval Office last Wednesday was, you shouldn't treat your friends like your enemies and your enemies like your friends. And so when he tweeted last night that he might have to work against some of us in 2018, I'd like to take this opportunity to send the message to the president that I'll be working for him in 2020. And maybe when he starts to determine who the people who he can rely on are, we'll see him circle back around to us, because we're the conservatives, we're the leaders, we're the ones that have shown a willingness heretofore to drain this swamp, unless maybe the president and I just have a fundamental misunderstanding on the definition of the word swamp.
Now, when you met with the president, was he upset at you?
Well, look, I mean, here's what I admire about the president. He has a mission. He has decided he's going to accomplish it, and he's doing the best he can to do that. Certainly, he's a human being, and he's subject to sways and passion, and he's used to being able to do things as an executive. That's not what our founders bequeathed us.
All right. We had the sheriff on yesterday who's making a big to-do, and he says because he doesn't like any representative, as was the case in New England, where you have a representative who wanted to give a heads up to any illegals who would be in our area if there was going to be an ICE raid. The sheriff said, well, you've made my job a lot more complicated. We have Judge Andrew Napolitano joining us right now. His point was, what the heck? What's the law of the land? What do you think of this?
Well, the law of the land is that the federal government cannot compel local law enforcement to work for the federal government. But local law enforcement has taken the same oath as federal law enforcement has, which is to enforce the laws of the land. So does local law enforcement have to go out and arrest undocumented aliens? No. Can it hide them? Can it secrete them? Can it frustrate the job of the feds as they pursue them?
Can it look the other way, which is typically what they do?
It can look the other way, but it cannot aggressively actively hide them or frustrate what the feds are doing. That's called obstruction of justice. So we had a case we looked at the other day where a judge sentenced an illegal alien to time served and said, I don't want you to leave the courthouse. I'm going to keep you in my chambers until the feds that are around the building leave. That's probably obstruction of justice.
Obviously, it complicates, let's say, a sheriff's job, because in the case of this one, he's trying to help ICE, round up illegals, let's say, and you have a local representative trying to thwart that. So what are the rules on that?
The rules will change the next time the Congress enacts a budget. because the new budget will say, we use as an example, we're going to talk about Seattle in a few minutes. Here's $100 million for your police department. As a condition of accepting this $100 million, you agree that the police will work with the feds, will work with ICE when we're looking for people. Once they accept the $100 million, they have a legal obligation to work with the feds. So all of this will change 6 or 8 months from now once the new block grants come out. But under the Obama era block grants, the money that's still being distributed by the federal government, where those conditions don't exist, the locals can avoid the feds.
How
not
can they,
frustrate
Judge?
them, but avoid
it's
them.
the law of the land, right? Or sanctuary cities. They've been there and around for so long that there's no stopping them.
Well, look, if the feds want the New York City police to help them find undocumented aliens in this neighborhood, they can't order them, the New York City police, to work for them. If they want to bring more feds in, they can do that. If they give grant blocks to New York City in October and the condition is the police will help, then the police will be legally obliged to help. So we're basically still under the Obama regime with respect to the conditions for the receipt of funds.
Gotcha. Now, Seattle is suing over this and saying that the Trump administration just can't threaten to cut off federal funds. You drew a distinction with new federal funds,
correct.
New block grants.
They can threaten. They can't take money back that's already been committed for this fiscal year, which goes till September 30th. But the flip side of this is the litigation from Seattle is frivolous because they haven't been harmed yet. The feds haven't taken a nickel away from you. You can't sue because you think somebody's going to hurt you. You sue after they have hurt you.
Where is this going? Because we have these sanctuary cities and states and whole regions, and then in New York and in Chicago, and what?
The states and the cities have never turned down federal grants because the conditions were too burdensome. So President Trump and the executive branch and the Republican majorities in Congress will have to endure this frustration until the next fiscal year, when they dangle that cash in front of all these cities and they take the cash, and when they take it, they take the strings that are attached with it as well. That's what the Supreme Court has ruled.
But isn't it a whole different matter, Doug, when you get to a point of not only looking the other way, but as this representative was advocating in Massachusetts, actually warning illegals, hey, ICE agents are coming.
That would probably be misconduct in office if done by somebody who took an oath to uphold the law. If done by a Catholic priest or bishop who wants to hide them in the basement, not misconduct in office because they're not in the government. So we get a little dicey here as to who can do what.
Is it your sense to, I mean, this gets in the realm of politics here, but this stuff and everything else that's going on, and the Russians and who knew what and when, just to dislodge the Trump agenda?
I do. I think it's a massive onslaught against him from people in the media and in local and state government who still can't believe that he's president and want to put as many and they want to put as many obstacles in his path as possible. The Hawaii judge that ruled last night extending the nationwide a ban on the travel order, if that same order had been signed by Barack Obama, would have been upheld. How do I know that? Because the reasons given for invalidating the order were things that Donald Trump said before he was president. I have never seen before the Trump presidency the words of a candidate used against an office holder. And the Supreme Court has cautioned against that. Because as we all know, candidates say things in the heat of the campaign that they don't necessarily follow up on. I never understood that because
you can glean intent, can't you?
You can glean intent, but you can't use somebody's words to frustrate, as a candidate, to frustrate what they do as an office holder. And that's what this judge in Hawaii did.
Amazing. All right, Judge, so good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be with you.
Andrew Napolitano, we have a lot more coming up, including the controversy of Ivanka Trump working for her dad in an unpaid role. Now, we have nepotism laws that a lot of people say started with Bobby Kennedy being JFK's attorney general, but he thinks that Bobby Kennedy was worshipped, as he should have been, right? Why not Ivanka Trump? After this. All right, working for her dad in an unpaid role, and that was enough to get charges of nepotism going fast and strong. GOP strategist Ashley Hayek joining us right now. We've seen this again and again. I guess there are new rules in effect ever since John Kennedy appointed his brother Bobby as Attorney General. that we police this sort of stuff. But what's to police? Is it that big a deal?
No, it's not that big of a deal. They're going after Ivanka Trump once again because her dad is a Republican. And Ivanka deserves a seat at the table. She's qualified, she's credentialed, she's a working mom. She's breaking the Republican stereotype that the Democrats have set, that Republicans are out of touch, they don't champion women's issues, and they're a threat. So they're going to claim nepotism, and it's completely hypocritical. We just saw it under Bill Clinton when he put Hillary Clinton as the head of the healthcare tax.
Even better example. Even better example. And no one looked the other way.
Not at all. It was not a problem. But you know what? This goes back to the Democrats being complete hypocrites, and it's it affects everybody except for us. It doesn't. The rules don't apply to us, and you know it's the same rhetoric we hear over and over again.
All right, now I can even see, and even Democrats vote, you know, were keen on addressing this nepotism thing with Bobby Kennedy, and you can't appoint, you know, a relative to a cabinet position, fine. But I was looking in the past here, and I covered this because I'm a little older than some of the other folks here. Harriet Ling was the niece of James Buchanan, our only bachelor president, and effectively served the role as kind of like a first lady. Did okay. Martha Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's daughter, filled that kind of function during his administration, and I could go on and on. So I guess what I'm asking, whether it's Rose Cleveland, who served with her brother Grover Cleveland in a quasi-capacity until he got married, we had a history of this sort of thing without doing great harm to our Constitution or country. What is the big deal?
There is no big deal. Again, let's go back to the Democrats saying doesn't apply to us. Anna Roosevelt served as her father's personal assistant, Franklin Roosevelt, and there was not an issue there. You know, the funny thing about this whole issue is that Ivanka was operating under a good faith agreement with the White House. The left got enraged because they didn't like her being involved, so she said, okay, that's fine. I'm going to play by your rules. I'll become a White House employee, a federal employee. I'll do the necessary paperwork, the background checks, the security clearances, and I won't get paid, and yet it's still not enough.
What would be wrong if she was just part of a kitchen cabinet? Remember Richard Nixon had his brother kind of serving in that role without a title per se, but they're advisors. They're people who talk to without any official capacity. What would have been the difference there?
It's my understanding that family members can't serve in the cabinet. However, serving as an employee is constitutionally acceptable.
Okay.
And that's
but now this
simple.
would just be an advisor, you know, whatever.
In a way, she kind of is still.
Yeah.
But again, the so-called feminists, they can't have it both ways. The Democrats cannot have it both ways. You can't say you need to be arguing on this issue, but then you can't have a seat at the table.
Yeah, you have to be consistent. All right, thank you very much.